The Houston Rockets have been going through it. They lost one of the most winning coaches in NBA history in Mike D'Antoni to the Brooklyn Nets. They lost the most innovative GM of all time, arguably, one of the league's very best, in Morey to Philadelphia, and if things go the way that's been predicted for the past few months, they'll have lost 2 MVPs in the same season. So, what happened? Just 2 years ago, Houston was seen as a title favorite, winning 65 games and taking the greatest team in NBA history to a decisive 7-game series. Their offense was revolutionary, and they're hated by nearly all of the NBA fandom, which is a good indicator, typically, of a super successful sports team. James Harden was a homegrown talent, so to speak, blossoming into one of history's greatest basketball players under Houston's wing. All the stars pointed towards a long, successful tenure for at least 5 or 6 more years. Whatever happened after that was surely going to crash and burn and be horrible, but all of that has been accelerated now, rather unexpectedly. What's up, y'all? I'm KipComma11 back. Yes, I am back with another video. You know, I always thought the Rockets' demise was gonna be slow. With the drastic upheaval in future assets and an all-in attitude with huge contract players who are going to decline in playing very, very soon. CP3 Russ, goodness gracious. Bad things were going to happen unless they pulled off some sort of crazy miracle that would shed them of those huge contracts, plus get them picks, plus get them younger players that could turn out to be stars. That probably wasn't going to happen. But in the meantime, with 2 MVPs, I hope that they could at least get 1 championship together before everything blew up. But oh boy, I was wrong, golly. I didn't know who to blame at first. As some of you guys saw, I thought that it was Russ.
What do you have to prove? What? You don't want to win.
Others thought and still think that it was Harden or Morey for pushing the envelope too far and blowing up any of their chances. Then there were others, particularly Houston fans, that blamed the ownership. Or rather, the owner. One person. There had been issues within the past 2 years in the Rockets' management ever since the former owner Les Alexander sold the team to billion restaurateur Tilman Fertitta. It was little things here and there that would tip it off, letting Luka Mbamute go to the Clippers for no reason, the sudden caution with spending money, and other things of that nature. I personally, as a Rockets fan, thought well of Fertitta. The previous owner gave him his blessing, and that was all that I really needed. When the weird moves would come in, I sort of just charged it to some sort of bad luck. Boy, and I know better now. Yikes. As it happened, I was dead wrong. Tilman Fertitta is a Houston native, and what you would call a successful businessman in his own right. As one of the richest people in the world, placed 181st with a net worth of $4.2 billion, and recognized by Forbes as the world's richest restaurateur, which basically means he owns a lot of places to eat. Alongside his claim to fame business Landry's Incorporated, which is a string of restaurant and entertainment venues that revolve mainly around seafood, he's also the owner of the Golden Nugget Casino franchise, with multiple casinos around America, and the owner of the Pleasure Pier in Galveston, Texas, as well as other properties in Houston. He took that success and flipped it into a TV show on CNBC known as Billion Dollar Buyer, that ran from 2016 to 2018. I never seen the show before I researched this video, but believe me, after watching the first episode, it tells you all that you need to know about his character, especially once you put all the pieces together. He then went on to purchase the Houston Rockets in 2017 for $2.2 billion, beating out 2 other buying groups, both including packages that offered more money. This is where it gets sketchy. His methods for buying the team, which we're going to talk about, were not very savory at all. The way that he purchased the team became the catalyst for the rest of his tenure in Houston, estranging his 2 superstar players, his GM, and his legendary coach, and eventually, within the next few years, leading the Houston Rockets to a downward spiral. In order to fully get a grasp at what issues were already there from the start, we're gonna have to take a look at the Fertitta family tree, courtesy of TrueHoop.net. Now, if you're somewhat familiar with mob culture in the 20th century from movies and whatnot, some stuff starts to look quite fishy. Victor Joseph. Rose? 3 sets of Frank with the last one with the nickname 3 Sticks? Sure, that might be an Italian thing, no racial, but with the Fertitta family, it most definitely wasn't just Italian. You see the name that isn't like all the others. That's Olivia Maceo, the daughter and niece of the 2 most notorious crime bosses in Texas, Big Sam and Papa Rose Maceo. That's right. Tilman Fertitta is the descendant of mafia gang leaders. Salvatore and Rosario Maceo, as were their real names, were immigrants from Sicily, Italy, and eventually made their way into the business of selling liquor, an activity that was illegal in the time period between the United States' 18th and 21st Amendments, known as the Prohibition era. Eventually, they got good enough at that they opened the Hollywood Dinner Club, the most successful night spot on the Gulf Coast. Then they opened up the Balinese Room, originally Maceo's grotto, with an elaborate anti-law enforcement system, while beginning their takeover in Galveston, Texas. They owned multiple businesses, both illegal and legal, and had a strong hand in facilitating the establishments that James Harden would quite enjoy frequenting in. Galveston soon had the most of those in the country, and it became a way of life. The Maceos had basically everything in Galveston. Even the police force was under their wing. They had guests like Frank Sinatra at the Balinese Room and inquiries from syndicate leaders like Al Capone, of whom Anthony Fertitta, Tilman's great uncle, would be in charge of dealing with. Anthony, alongside his brother and Tilman's grandfather Victor, took care of the Balinese Room and various other casinos until the syndicate was busted. For the 30 years that the Maceo Fertitta syndicate was in place, the town of Galveston was wrapped under their finger. 10% of the adult population was employed by some Maceo business. The crime rates were the lowest in the country, but that's just because they had their own crime force that would dispose of any troublemakers. That doesn't mean that they weren't criminals. One of them, Papa Rose, was suspected of multiple murders directed towards those who crossed him. And the entire family, including Tilman's grandfather, was convicted at one point by the Galveston County. After the 1950s, however, the syndicate gradually winded down. But still, years later in the 1980s, Tilman's uncle, Frank Fertitta Jr., who'd started up casinos in Las Vegas, was caught up in a federal investigation case that involved siphoning money off to mafia members in Kansas City, where he was implicated but never convicted due to the informant refusing to say anything about him. Eventually, Frank retired in 1991 and passed off the casino business to his son and Tilman's second cousin, Frank III, where it's still going strong today. So yeah, Tilman Fertitta's got himself some ties, alright. But the thing is, he himself wasn't affiliated with any of those illegal activities in any way. No, where Tilman bet his hat was on a business model that was just as exploitative, but still quite legal. When you take into account where his genes come from, it's not really that hard to believe that he's done the things that he's done. And trust me, he's done a lot of things and stepped on a lot of lines in his day. And that's true all the way even up to now. Tilman Fertitta made his rise into the business of billionaires in a suspect fashion. As a rather subpar student in high school, he spent 2 years at the University of Houston until he dropped out to run a women's clothing store in the city of Houston. After running through that business, he went and operated vitamin stores, opened up a network of video game arcades across Houston, and took advantage of a booming market to get the funds to open a 160-room hotel, the Key Largo in Galveston. But then the banks failed. And then those banks that failed sued Tilman for taking loans from them, all 25 of them. After a bunch of dodging and weaving through a legal partner from his cousin, he was able to manage the debt enough to not file bankruptcy. Even so, he needed cash. In order to get out of that situation, he bought a restaurant chain roaring through Houston at the time, owned by the Landry brothers. After buying them out, he shut the brothers out from their own name, not allowing them to rename any further restaurants using their names or their father's, Willie G. But he himself opened restaurants all across Texas, making Landry's Incorporated a quite profitable business. After making a bit of money from going public in 1993, Fertitta set his business on a budget buying binge. From Joe's Crab Shack to Saltgrass Steakhouse to Rainforest Cafe, all for prices far below than what they were actually worth. He would scoop up struggling businesses, get rid of the leadership and everyone affiliated with it, and then formulate food for the masses. In 1997, he bought up the boardwalk where one of his first businesses were in Galveston and converted it into an entire Fertitta-owned string of restaurants and entertainment venues, called the Kamar Boardwalk. He continued with this approach with business after business, all the way well into the 2000s, taking struggling companies and completely restructuring them in order to expand his empire. In an interview with Forbes, he said this: "When we buy somebody, we cut the head off," he says. "We keep the operators who are looking, I hate to use this term, they're looking for a leader. We lead very well, and we immediately spend money on them to make them better. Everybody wants to be led, except for me," he adds. "I want to lead." not the greatest indicator of a fair businessman. In addition to preying on struggling restaurants, he also manipulated the stock market, using the ebbs and flows of it to not only acquire businesses at lower rates, but also gain money by strategically going public and going back private as a way to increase cash flow. And the end goal for him remains the same: to be in control of 100% of his companies. Why? Because he wants to. Do you think he started going into restaurant business because he liked it? No.
Are you into food? Is that how you got into the restaurant business?
No, I'm into money.
Okay.
Now, this is a serious issue for the Houston Rockets. These tendencies that Fertitta has have come back to haunt him, and as an extension, come to haunt the Houston Rockets. It's a tale of many creditors, many loans, and not a lot of cash. No, on the contrary, a lot of debt, and a potential bankruptcy. But that's all for next time. I'll see you guys later.